So the evidence is to achieve our objective, we recognize the need to provide evidence. So we've created a website, as I told you before, where we collect past, current, and planned work going on across the world in 6 key areas: emission reduction, energy efficiency, transport efficiency, reduction in loss of milk and milk products, resource efficiency, and finally life cycle analysis and management. So we created an accessible, searchable database of projects from industry stakeholders, and we call this the Green Paper. And the Green Paper right now has more than 260 projects from 40 countries on these 6 categories that I've mentioned. So it's really a catalog of continuous improvement. So this is not a one-time shot that we did in Berlin. Every month, we add on new projects that people are submitting from the industry. And if you haven't submitted your project, please do so. It's a very easy thing to do. You just go to the website and you have a form to fill. And please tell your story. I mean, we're trying to create a focal point where globally the industry is promoting all of its activities to address the climate change. So it's a living document. And it's not updated just every year. It will be, their commitment is that we will report on progress on a yearly basis. But we're updating our Green Paper on a monthly basis. And it's very transparent as a process. So it is available to the public. It's not a private website. This is something that we want to very much talk about. A couple of examples. And I should have used ILPAC as a good example in one of those things, but I'm using just a couple. I'm not going to review the 260 projects for your sake. In emission reductions, I'm using this one from the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. And they have a project called the Cow of the Future, which has a goal to reduce emissions from enteric methane by 25% by the year 2020. And they figure that from their program, if they get a 50% adoption rate, the potential result from these solutions would be a 30% increase in feed efficiency. Now, reducing the carbon footprint of fluid milk would be 600,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. And the reason I chose this example is that they are trying to always evaluate what's the actual value, economic value, and they estimated that this would be $240 million in terms of business value. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. As we deal with mitigations, we will have actions. I know I deal with farmers. You show them that they can actually save money by reducing their energy costs and intake, you will actually get on the program fairly easily. And that's a good example of how this particular program works. Resource efficiency. Here again, it's a similar issue as Richard previously was talking about, where you're reducing the packaging material, that you're using recycled material, and you're trying to make sure also that you're maintaining a fair degree of recycling of the material afterwards in terms of the packaging. So other achievement to date, again, as Kevin said this morning, the FAO report on GHG emissions from the dairy sector, which was just released last week, which is a very key element, and I'll address it in a second. And secondly, the IDEA Action Team report on the life cycle analysis that will be published hopefully in the coming weeks. There's a lot of activities going on. Let's deal with the FAO report. This is a close collaboration between the FAO and IDF to assess the greenhouse gas emissions from the dairy food chain, which led the FAO report on greenhouse gas emissions from the dairy sector, titled the Life Cycle Assessment, which, as I said, was released last week. Now, the study was made possible by a financial contribution from IDF member countries, but also from Global Dairy Platform and Tetra Pak. We all work together in trying to make this a reality and make it happen. And again, as Kevin says, we were faced with that 18% from the FAO report in 2006, which was quoted as being more than the transportation for the livestock industry, and that has kind of been a problem that we're trying to fix. There's also been very close scientific and technical collaboration between the experts of IDF and the expert of the SEI platform in both this particular project with the FAO as well as with the LCA activity. The objective of the FAO is to identify accurately the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the world's dairy sector and assess the relative contribution of different production systems and products the total emissions from the sector. And this is what's unique about this particular report. It's not as much in numbers as it is that they have done a differentiation in terms of the type of production system that you have, whether you were grassland or whether you were mixed farming, as well as the regional aspect. And a fundamental part of the process is understanding and continually minimizing the environmental impacts by the dairy sector, and identify key areas of impact and design practical and cost-effective adaptation options to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from the dairy sector. Because actually the last chapter of the report is about mitigation and what can be done to reduce gas emissions. The main conclusions, the 2.7% contribution for the dairy sector, again, there's a kind of a range, but the 2.7 is the mid, which more or less validated some previous report and review of literature. I know the European Dairy Association, for example, had done the Delft report, which was quoting the 3%, so it's in the same ballpark. And I think it rectified and placed the dairy industry in the proper position. The outputs of this report are in line with, as I said, other published documents. The global average of emissions from milk production, processing, and transport, this is not including milk, is 2.4 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of milk at farm gate. And actually that's what they call the fat and protein corrected milk. So it's a standard unit of 4% fat and 3.3% protein. And finally, the overall emissions attributed to the dairy herd, that includes both milk and the meat sector, the meat part, plus milk processing and transportation activities up to the retail level, are estimated at 4% of total global nitrogenic GHG emissions.